Can we escape fate? Are we free to determine our own destiny, our own path through life? Or are we just pawns pushed around by forces we don't understand? Meet Walter Faber, a man who believes in logic, reason, and in engineering his own destiny. Max Frisch, Homo Faber, is not just another novel. It's a modern reenactment of ancient tragedy, where every rational choice leads to inevitable doom. Welcome to Books You Can't Miss. Hello, welcome back. My name is Andy, and today we are going to talk about a book that is immensely timely. It is a book that talks about tech bros, about technology and the effects of technology on human beings, on the soul of human beings, but it does this in 1957, at a time when you would not expect this. So it's an immensely prophetical book, and it is also a book that really captures both the essence of ancient Greek tragedy and the essence of what technology does to us in a modern tale. The book I'm talking about is Homo Faber, Homo Faber, you would say perhaps, in English, by Max Frisch. Max Frisch was a very influential German author who mainly wrote in the 50s, 60s, up to the 70s. And he was perhaps one of the biggest names of German literature throughout the 60s. And is still taught in schools. Still his books are very important, very influential, very much talked about. And this book is one of his most famous. There was even a movie made from it, an American movie actually, with American actors, international production, partly German, partly French, I think, partly American. And I will link to the movie. You can find it on YouTube, I think. I will link to it, and you can watch it if you like. And I will also, from time to time, show you pictures from this movie here while we discuss the book. And what does the title mean? Homo means human. Homo sapiens, the wise human, which is our biological self-designation as a species. And Faber, the second part, Faber, in German, I will tend to pronounce it Faber because Frisch was German, he wrote German. Anyway, Homo Faber, Homo Faber, however you want to pronounce it. Faber is related to the word to fabricate. Fabrication, fabric, means something that is artificially made. And so the Homo Faber is in anthropology sometimes used, or in history or in sociology, as the concept that human beings can be seen under this perspective of being tool makers, tool-making animals. Homo Faber, fabricating animals. Because all other animals, this is at least, the assumption there when we use the word, all other animals don't do that. It is not entirely true. Crows are known to use tools. Apes can use sticks to get bananas from the tree, so they are using tools. But undoubtedly, human beings have a much greater capacity at this. We can not only use tools that we find, but we can fabricate tools. We can fabricate tools that we are going to, very complex tools or multiple steps that we are going to use in a very remote future. We can fabricate tools for other people. We can make factories which then will produce other things. So we have multiple levels of tool use, and industrial societies are all based on this idea of fabricating things. And in this way, our whole modern world is a world of fabricating things that started, of course, with the Industrial Revolution back in England. And we are defined as being Homo Faber, as being tool-making animals. You cannot think of human beings in any other way. Of course, we have many other properties, but if you look around your world, if you just look around your room, It's full of things that we have fabricated. The room itself, the house is fabricated. None of us live in caves that occur naturally. Behind me, you see the books. In front of me is the light that shines on me. There's a microphone, there's a camera, and we are surrounded by our fabrications. We are tool-making animals. We are tool-using animals. And so Frisch sees the essence of the human being as being Homo Faber. And in this tale, because this is not an anthropological or philosophical book, it's a tale, and he begins with a particular person who represents this thing, this Homo Faber. And today we would have, we would say Elon Musk represents the ideal Homo Faber, right? Somebody whose whole life is dedicated to fabricating stuff, artificial stuff that is supposed to make life better or more interesting or more, to eradicate disease or to bring us to Mars. All these big promises of industrialization, right? Zuckerberg from Facebook and Meta is another Homo Faber. We are surrounded by them, right? There are many, many like that. Even Bill Gates, you can say, is a Homo Faber. Every industrial person, every software developer defines themselves, defines their life through their work with machines, with artificial things. But it's important to see that although today we have all these big personalities that represent technology and even the dangers of technology, in reality this is a very old thing, right? Technology always existed. The ancient Greeks had technology. They had writing, they built temples, they had lots of artificial structures, they had weapons, military technology. And particularly, of course, throughout human history, all kinds of technologies for everyday life. We had mills, we had windmills, we have water mills, we have, again, technologies for war. We have ships, we have technologies of discovery, we have books, we have libraries. These are all technologies. And then there was this explosion of technology in the 18th, 19th century, what we call the Industrial Revolution. This was a big boost in technology and in the way we relate to technology. And this took away from us almost entirely our non-technological life that we had before. So after the Industrial Revolution, we are all married with technology, almost necessarily. It's almost inescapable. There are a few individuals who try to live without technology. They go, in their homestead and live, without electricity and without modern conveniences. But these are so prominent because they are so rare that we watch videos about them and about their lives, and they are, on YouTube and, perversely, again, using technology in order to show us how well they live without technology. And everybody else is just totally embedded in this technological world. Now the question is, what does this do to us? And this question Frisch asks in the 50s, end of the 50s, and you have to see that this is a big time of engineering back then in the 50s. The 50s were, after the Second World War, the time when the West, especially the United States, but also Western Europe, was rebuilt. The United States didn't need rebuilding because they had not suffered destruction on their own soil, and they had the wealth that came from being the winners in the war. They had machines, they had all this technology that was developed throughout the war, primarily airplanes, landing strips, tanks, cars, vehicles of all sorts, food technologies. And now they took all these technologies and they applied them to everyday life. And suddenly there was this sense of a new explosion, a new age of industrial revolution. And you can see this in comics, in the Jetsons and other such visions of people, living in this jet age. The jet age itself, right? Jet engines are from this time, end of the Second World War, were the first jet engines for airplanes. Air travel, which made it possible to travel very quickly, much faster than ever before. And the decline of ocean voyages, in favor of airplane voyages. And there was this feeling that we are going into a science fiction world, and you had all these science fiction exhibitions, and science fiction itself took off in the 50s. And It was the big time of science fiction, actually, if you look at all these writers. Bradbury, Clarke, Asimov, these all flourished, throughout the 50s, 60s, which was the time when people were hungry for technology to change their lives for the better, to bring us into some utopian world. You had concepts of space stations back there, flying to Mars, having these big space stations like you see them in 2001, Space Odyssey, right, the Kubrick movie. And then, of course, you had the Apollo program, flying to the moon. And flying to the moon was the big thing. Kennedy, at the beginning of the 60s, saying that in 10 years, we will land on the moon. And I make this promise, I make this plan, I commit us to landing on the moon by the end of the 60s. And they managed. They went to the moon. And they paid a ton of money for it. And they developed all the technologies that were necessary, almost out of nowhere. And within 10 years, a man was standing on the moon. So this is an explosion of technology. This is a belief in technology, in the power of technology to make us better, not only, to bring us to the moon in a way, like a transportation achievement, but to make our lives better, to make our relationship with the world better. And this is also expressed then, and now we come back to the book, right, in terms of development help to other countries, which also started after the Second World War. The idea that rich countries help poorer countries, not by colonizing them, but by providing technical help. So you have the UNESCO, you have the UN, all kinds of UN development programs, sending engineers from the West and tools from the West and machines from the West, from the rich countries, to the developing countries where they will be used to improve the lives of the people in these developing countries, right? And this is exactly where we are. In the book Homo Faber, when we begin, we have this person, Walter Faber. He's called Walter Faber, that's his name. And he is a German, originally living in New York now, and he's an engineer for the UN. He's traveling around, sent by his company who develops machines for the developing world. And he is sent around to various places in the developing world to install and oversee, the operations of these machines. And so his job is very much the job of this Enlightenment engineer. Somebody like Elon Musk, who is convinced that his work directly contributes to the bettering of humanity, to making the world better, to improving it, to saving lives. And he really believes in it. He has an almost religious belief in technology, in science, and he refuses to engage with anything else. And now this is important because we come to this point where we realize very soon that Walter is not able anymore to engage with human feelings that are outside of the sphere of technology. And again, much like today we have these tech bros who seem to be stuck in their world of technology, unable to perceive any problems outside of their technology, who believe that everything can be solved through technology. And Walter Faber is like this. He's a person who cannot have a normal human relationship. He has a girlfriend, but he only meets this girlfriend in order to satisfy some social needs. He is not himself attached to this girlfriend, although she is to him. He is never afraid of the dark, for example. He says, why should I be afraid of the dark? There is not dark, is dark. And people who see ghosts in the dark, they have a problem. This is not rational. And when he sees something beautiful, a sunset, he says, okay, I know why the sunset is red, because this is the CO2 from the air, and the light is refracted and, scattered in particular ways that make the sunset red. But there is nothing to it. There is nothing to admire. Why should I admire the CO2 content of the atmosphere and call it, a beautiful sunset? What does it even mean, beauty, right? What is beauty? So Walter Faber goes through life in this way of detachment, of scientific detachment, of calculating everything, of knowing how things come about. In a way, he is a superior man in this tech bro way, because he is superior to his own feelings. He is not a slave to passions. He is somebody who is cool, detached, superior to the world also, at least he thinks so, because he understands the world in a way others don't. When he is in an airplane, and the story begins in an airplane, and the airplane is shaking, others are perhaps afraid for their lives. He is not, because he knows how much load the airplane wings can take, and when the shaking will become too much. And all this is rational thought that keeps him from being afraid. And now for the rest of the book, and this is the nice thing about this story. And don't forget, we are not talking about a non-fiction book, we are talking about a story. We are talking about a novel, and a very gripping novel, a beautiful novel. The novel begins with this weird man, Walter Faber, who is stuck in this way of seeing the world. And now the rest of the novel, the whole program of this book, is to deconstruct Walter Faber, to show him that the world is not as he thinks it is, to show him that a human being cannot live in this way, that we are not like that. And Frisch goes in a confrontation course with this character Faber that he invented. He confronts him with all sorts of disasters, step by step, little by little, until the life of Walter Faber unravels and becomes worse and worse and becomes unbearable, and he reaches a point at which his world collapses. So the story begins in an airplane. Walter Faber is flying, and it is the genius of Frisch that from the beginning we see immediately how Walter Faber sees the world. He looks out of the window, he sees the moon, he sees the remote hills and mountains along the way out of his airplane window down there, in the hazy purple light of dusk. And instead of seeing all these things, he sees just hills, he sees colors, he sees the scattering, like I said, of the light. And he says, why are people so crazy about this? Why do people see things so poetically? You don't have to do this. You can just say, these are hills, this is an airplane, I'm looking out of the window, and that's it. And behind him sits a man, a Swiss businessman, and the two play chess after a while to pass the time. Remember, this is 1957. It was written, so probably it is 1955 or something in the story. So this is a time when airplanes could not yet fly, not even across the continental United States, non-stop. So they are landing at some point to refuel. And when they land there for refueling, the first unusual thing happens. Suddenly Walter Faber has the feeling that he does not want to continue. He doesn't feel well. He feels dizzy. He feels sick. He goes in the bathroom. He waits it out, and he misses his plane. He goes out, and somehow he is relieved to have missed the plane. He doesn't understand why. He distrusts his feeling because, as we said, he tries not to have any feelings. So he feels bad about missing his plane, but he knows there's another plane, there's no problem, he will get the next plane. But then he meets a stewardess from his plane who is still looking for him. So he has not actually missed his plane. The stewardess grabs him and pulls him onto the plane, although he feels that he doesn't want to. He feels this resistance. And what happens next? You can imagine the plane crashes. And so this premonition was actually the premonition of this thing that was going to happen. And this upsets him because this whole thought is alien to him, because premonitions don't exist. Premonitions are not scientific. He shouldn't have this. This shouldn't have happened. The whole crash shouldn't have happened because airplanes are safe. But anyway, it happened, and the crash itself can be explained in mechanistic ways. It can be explained with science. So he is not unduly upset by the crash itself. He takes it cooler than the other people on the plane. Nobody is injured. There are no deaths. The crash is, a very soft landing in the desert. So now they're sitting in the desert. Everybody is fine. They get out of the airplane. They have drinks. They have food. And they spend a few days, I don't remember how long exactly, 2-3 days, waiting to be rescued, while they are relatively comfortable there in the desert. And this is used again as a way from Frisch to show how Walter Faber sees the world. After a while, they are rescued, they are brought to their destination, but then Walter Faber finds out that the person who was sitting with him in the plane, the Swiss businessman, is somebody who knows people from his past, people Walter Faber studied with in Zurich, in Switzerland, long ago when he was a student. And so they become friends and they decide to continue together. And although Faber is always busy denying that this plane crash affects him emotionally, we see that he is shaken. He doesn't want to go home. He does not want to continue his normal life immediately. He does not want to go to his engineering job with the UN where he was originally going to. He needs a break. And so he goes together with this man who was in the airplane. His seat neighbor, they go together, they rent a jeep, and they go to find the friend of Walter Faber's youth who now is in this Latin American country and has a farm somewhere. And so suddenly they find themselves, although Faber is always so rational and so calculative and so unemotional, suddenly he finds himself in a South American jungle on a jeep together with a person he barely knows, looking for a friend from his past. And this is the beginning of this unraveling. And they go and they find the friend from his past, but unfortunately, this friend has committed suicide on his farm. And this is another blow to Walter Faber. Suddenly, it's not only seeing his friend from the past, but it is witnessing the death of his friend from the past and seeing that the world is not as he thought. The world is not this well-ordered thing where everybody goes on their orbits like planets. The world is a place that can be dangerous, that can be unpredictable. It's a place where you can die. And this is the next shock. And now Walter Faber leaves the jungle, he goes back home, he lands in New York, he meets his girlfriend, and she hopes that he is now back for a while and they can, do the usual thing, what people do in a couple. They go out together, they eat. But Faber is restless. He does not want this life anymore. He feels that he needs a break, particularly after the discovery of his dead friend. And he decides to leave immediately. Again, he calls his boss and he says, I want to leave earlier for the next job. I don't want a rest in New York. I want to leave. I want to go to the next job, which will be in Europe, in France somewhere. And send me immediately. And the boss says, yes, okay, but you will be too early. You only have to be there, in 2 weeks. You are not supposed to go now. And he says, okay, then I will take a ship. I will cross the Atlantic in a ship. And this is again a particularly wild suggestion, right, by somebody so technologically refined as Walter Faber, because of course he would use the most efficient means. He would use an airplane, not a ship. A ship is something even in the 50s that you don't use anymore to cross the Atlantic. Although there are ships that have this schedule, but it's more something for old people who want to relax and they want to chill on the ship. It's not something for a young dynamic engineer who is going to a UN project. But Walter Faber says, I want to do this. I want to go on the ship. So Walter Faber, now already a little shaken in his worldview but unable to admit it, takes the ship and sails to Europe. And we see already, and this is the mastery of Frisch, how slowly this person starts to fall apart in a way that he himself cannot see, but we can see it from the outside. And now this whole thing has a very ancient Greek tragedy ring to it. And for this it's important to know how Greek tragedies actually worked. Because the whole idea of a tragedy is that you see a person who is a good person, but in some way flawed, and then the worst possible thing happens to them, but not because of an accident, not because of a random accident, but because of their life choices, because it's the consequence, the expected outcome of their life choices. And the more they try to act against fate, the more fate comes after them. And the more what they try to avoid is what actually happens to them. And this is something you see in all these ancient tragedies. They all begin with a setup, with some situation that is there at the beginning. And you know that just consequently following this setup will lead you to the worst possible outcome, will lead you to the tragic outcome. And this is exactly what happens to Walter in this book. We start with this person who is unable to have feelings, who is unable to be a human being, who sees everything mechanistically, everything as a machine. The whole universe is just a machine. And just following this idea to its end, to its necessary end, destroys the person. And so now we are already underway, right? He is on his ship, he is shaken, he cannot admit it, he tries to have a good time, he pretends to himself that he has a good time. And when you read the book, it sounds like a good time. But you know that this person would not have behaved like this if they were indeed okay, which they are not. And so one day, as he is on the deck of the ship, looking for some entertainment, for some game to play or for something to do, he meets a young woman, Elizabeth. He calls her Sabbath. And he just notices her from a distance at the beginning and he tries to avoid her. He doesn't want another relationship. And this again is Walter Faber trying to avoid something that is scary to him, a human relationship. But of course, we being outside of this and looking inside like the gods we are, reading this novel, we know what is going to happen. He is not able to avoid this because the whole universe of the novel will conspire to bring him into this situation where he will again meet his demons. And so this woman is not going anywhere. And they have to be scheduled together for the same table for lunch and dinner because no other places are free. And although Walter tries to avoid eating at the same table with her, in the end, they are there together. And he happens to play ping pong and she happens to play ping pong, so they start playing ping pong. She has a boyfriend, but she soon quarrels with the boyfriend. And when they finally arrive in France, Walter Faber and the girl are friends, but nothing else happens. They separate and they say goodbye, and the girl goes away to Paris. Now, Walter is much older than the girl. He could be her father, and he knows this, and this is why he also knows that trying to have any kind of relationship is pointless. And so he goes his way in Paris, also away from her, but it is still too early. He still arrived too early, still has a few days to wait, and so he looks in Paris for things to do, and of course, if you are in Paris, you go to the museum. And so he goes to the museum to see what that is about. And it is not that he's particularly interested in museums. Museums are old, they are not technological, there's nothing for him to see there. But something pulls him there, right? Something tells him to go to the museum. And here again we have his subconscious, perhaps, some subconscious wish, some urge to fulfill his destiny. And of course, in the museum, he meets the girl again. They go have a coffee, they go eat together, and they like each other. And she feels that she can profit from his friendship because he is so much more older than her, so much more experienced. He even has a car, he has a lot of money, she doesn't have any. And so he offers, at a moment of, not being himself or not thinking or of being, you could say, overwhelmed by this situation, he offers to take her in his car to Italy. And so now these two people that should never have been together are together on a car driving to Italy. And of course, slowly the thing becomes more, and they start being a couple, they start having a relationship that none of the two actually wants to acknowledge, because Walter Faber doesn't want it, and the girl is also confused because this man is so much older than her. So now, little by little, Faber pieces together the background of the girl, and it turns out that this girl is the daughter of one of his friends from when he was young. And here we have this echo from the beginning of the book, where he met in the airplane this other person who knew his girlfriend while he was young, while he was a student, and who knew this other guy who killed himself in South America, who was also a friend of his from his study days. And now the girl mentions her mother, and the name of the mother is a name he knows. And he not only knows her mother, but it turns out at one very crucial moment in the novel, a very big moment in the novel, he realizes that this is his girlfriend from the times of his studies. And now, because this is in the 50s, and if you go back 15, 20 years, you end up in Nazi Germany. And so this is exactly now what happens to him 20 years before, when he was a student. Now he's a middle-aged man. He was in Nazi Germany, and this woman, this girl, then his girlfriend, was called Hannah, and she was a Jewish woman. And because it was Nazi Germany, and she was a Jewish woman, and he was not Jewish, he was, non-Jewish German, Aryan German, as they called them, they are not allowed to have a relationship, they are not allowed to marry. And Hannah doesn't want them to marry because she doesn't want to endanger the career of Walter Faber, who is going to have a career as an engineer. And if he married her, he wouldn't get a job, and he would be, a friend of Jews, which was the worst thing it would be in Nazi Germany, and it would even perhaps endanger his life. And so they separate, and Hannah gives up Walter for his own benefit. And this again is a moment where Walter behaves horribly to her, like he behaved horribly to the woman in New York, because he accepts her sacrifice. His career is to him more important than the relationship to Hannah, and he is okay with leaving her and her child. And I think he knows that she is going to have a child, but he leaves her anyway. He studies, he has his career, and Hannah is out of his life. But now he meets this daughter of Hannah, and he starts calculating, and eventually he works out that she must be his daughter, but he's unable to admit it to himself. And so a large part of this beautiful relationship between the two is traveling through the countryside in Italy on this sports car and being in the sun and having all these touristy experiences, and it's beautiful and it's a happy time, the 50s in Italy, everything is nice and cheap and sunny and beautiful and carefree. Nobody has anything to do. She's on a trip to eventually visit her mother, who lives in Athens. He is just waiting for his job to begin. And so nothing bad is happening externally to them, but internally, of course, this thing destroys him, the thought that this could be his daughter. And he keeps calculating on the back of cigarette packages and on the back of napkins, trying to add up whether this child is the child that he had with Hannah, whether she could be. And he arrives in the end at the conclusion that it's not possible. It just doesn't work out. She must be the child of somebody else. And this is also what her mother told her. Her mother didn't tell her about Walter because she separated from Walter in order to not implicate him in this. She told her that her father was somebody else. And now they continue in this way, and she tells him about her mother, and he says, I knew your mother. And they decide to go to Greece to visit the mother who is living in Greece. And of course, the choice of Greece, again, is a great move by Frisch, because he wants to go to this Greek tragedy motif, right? He wants to show us that this is a Greek tragedy. This person, Walter Faber, is going to be destroyed in the way of the Greek tragedy. And the whole point of the Greek tragedy, now perhaps we should mention this, is the catharsis, what Aristotle calls catharsis. Catharsis means cleansing, cleaning, ritual cleaning. And what happens in the tragedy, according to Aristotle, is that we see these people suffer, and through their suffering of the characters in the tragedy, we are cleaned internally from our bad thoughts, from our bad psychological situation, and we emerge renewed and clean and stronger and with more understanding and more compassion for others. So this cleansing is a process of growth, and this growth is crucial for Aristotle and is the whole point of the tragedy. So if you have a tragedy, it's not about seeing people suffer. The point is, through the suffering of the people, you should see the world and yourself in a new light, and this should make you a better person. And this is the same thing that Frisch wants us to do. He sees that every one of us is to some extent Walter Faber. And we are all guilty of this. And by steering Walter Faber through his life, through his past, towards his final resolution in Greece, towards this catharsis, he makes a statement about all of us. Why are we like this? And why are we, all of us, so technologically determined? Why are we so mechanical? Why are we neglecting our human qualities in favor of being these automata almost, right? Robots that neglect their humanity in order to have a more comfortable life, like Walter Faber does. And so Walter Faber, in the end, meets his destiny, and it's not a good one. They go to Athens, and there his daughter, who still doesn't know that she is his daughter, she wants to present him to her mother as her new boyfriend, as her partner. She is bitten by a snake. And so now he has to bring her to a hospital. He manages to bring her to a hospital in this Greece of the 50s, where, of course, there are no mobile phones. There is no way to call for help in a remote beach. He has to carry her. He has to find a truck to bring her to the hospital. And now you have this situation where the mother arrives at the hospital after she's being informed that her daughter is there, having been bitten by a snake, and her boyfriend is there. And now she meets this boyfriend, and this is her own boyfriend from 20 years prior, Walter Faber. And they now finally all realize what's happening and how impossible the situation is. And I won't spoil the ending for you. Perhaps I have already, because I told you the whole point of the tragedy is to lead to the worst possible outcome for all in order to achieve this catharsis. So go read the book, but in the end, of course, none of this turns out well for Walter Faber. He is unraveling. His life is at a point where it cannot possibly continue. So I hope you enjoyed this. I think it's a wonderful book with a wonderful understanding of human frailty, of human illusions, and also, as I said in the beginning, of the soul of the tech bro, the soul of the geek, who thinks that he has the world under control because he has the technology of the world under control. But the world and fate and personal fate is not a machine. And so, although we think that we have this world under control, in reality, the world is just waiting to pounce, right? This is more or less what this book is trying to tell us. And it does. And it destroys Walter, and it destroys his life. But it does so in a way that really achieves this catharsis for us, this cleansing. And so you come out of this book not depressed because of what happens to Walter. You come out of this book with a new appreciation of what it means to be human, of what it means to relate to one's past in a responsible way, to relate to one's mistakes and to take responsibility for one's life, which is very often something we try to avoid. And to appreciate how great and how wonderful life is if we only open our eyes, look at it, and engage with it. Thank you for being here, and see you next time for a book that you can't miss. Bye-bye.